All right. Ready to geek out on some economics?
Always game for a deep dive. Let's do it.
Today, it's all about supply and demand. And I know what you're thinking sounds a little dry, right? But trust me, this stuff is the invisible hand behind, well, pretty much everything.
It's way more exciting than those dusty textbooks make it seem. We're talking about the forces that determine how much things cost, why some things seem to defy logic. Like, have you ever wondered how those designer handbags get away with costing more than a month's rent?
Okay, yeah, that's always baffled me.
Supply and demand, my friend. It explains a lot.
Well, color me intrigued. We're using a great piece from Investopedia as our guide today. You can find the link in the show notes, and they really break it down in a way that makes sense.
They do a good job.
So let's start with the basics. Just in case anyone's new to this whole economics game, we've got supply, how much of something is out there in the world, and we've got a demand, how badly people want it. Pretty straightforward, right?
Seems simple enough on the surface, right?
Yeah.
But it's like an intricate dance.
How so?
Well, think about it. The availability of something and how much people want it are constantly in flux. They're directly impacted by all these external factors, sometimes in totally unpredictable ways. It's not a static thing. It's dynamic.
Oh, right. Like with gas prices during the pandemic, our article touched on that. Suddenly everyone's stuck at home, nobody's driving.
And bam, demand for gas goes through the floor. Remember what happened?
Prices tanked. And it wasn't just prices at the pump, I'm guessing.
Not even close. Oil producers had to make some tough decisions fast. They were staring down the barrel of way more supply than demand, so they cut production. Big time.
It really throws a wrench into that whole supply always meets demand idea, doesn't it?
It shows you how reactive this dance really is. But it's not just about external factors like pandemics. It's also about how people behave, how they respond to price changes. And that's where it gets really interesting. We're talking about price elasticity.
Okay, I'm already lost. Price elasticity sounds a little intimidating.
It's simpler than it sounds, I promise.
Yeah.
It just means how much a change in price actually makes people change their minds about buying something.
So, like, if the price of something goes up, do people still buy it?
Exactly. Some things, no matter how expensive they get, people still need them. Think about something like, I don't know, water. Even if the price of water doubled tomorrow.
You'd still have to buy it.
Exactly. You might cut back on other things, but you can't just stop drinking water, you get me. That's what we call inelastic demand. Essential goods, things people rely on, they tend to be less sensitive to price swings, at least within reason.
Okay, that makes sense. But I'm guessing it's a different story for those luxury items we were talking about earlier.
Now you're getting it.
So give me an example. Let's say the price of that luxury sports car you've always dreamed of suddenly doubled overnight.
Ouch. Yeah, that'd be a tough pill to swallow. Suddenly that dream car doesn't seem quite as appealing, right?
Definitely puts a damper on things.
And that's elastic demand in action. Those non-essential things, the things we can more easily live without, they're much more sensitive to those price changes.
So it's all about how essential something is, right? How much wiggle room people have in their budgets. But this makes me think about those luxury items that seem to break all the rules. You know, those designer handbags that cost more than a month's rent. How do they get away with that?
Ah, you've stumbled upon Veblen goods. They seem to defy the laws of economics, but there's a psychological aspect at play.
I always wondered about that. Is it really just about status?
A lot of it boils down to signaling. The higher the price tag, the more exclusive and desirable it becomes for a certain type of buyer. They're paying for the bragging rights as much as the actual product. Which honestly, it makes you wonder what happens when that desire for exclusivity starts to apply to things money can't buy.
Like what?
Like clean air or access to nature. Think about it.
Whoa, okay. So we're not just talking about the economics of it all, but also the psychology, the values driving those economic decisions. This is getting deep.
That's what we're here for. And this connection between values and economics, well, it becomes even more fascinating when you start thinking about things like automation. But we'll save that juicy tidbit for later.
Okay, you've got me hooked. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's bring it back to the here and now. Our article mentioned that understanding supply and demand isn't just for economists. It's a vital tool for businesses, too.
Absolutely. Every pricing decision a company makes is a gamble on supply and demand.
So they're constantly trying to strike that balance, the price that's attractive to consumers but also profitable for them, right?
Exactly.
It's making me rethink all those times I've been frustrated by a price hike. And we're back. Before the break, we were talking about how businesses are basically walking this tightrope between supply and demand, trying to find that sweet spot for pricing.
It's a global high wire act for sure. Remember that example from the article about gas prices? When crude oil prices went through the roof back in 2022, every oil-producing nation was basically in a race to, well,
To cash in. I mean, higher prices mean more profit, right?
exactly, supply and demand, baby. But, and this is a big but, ramping up oil production. Not exactly as simple as it sounds.
Oh, I can imagine. It's not like you can just flip a switch and boom, more oil.
Not even close. It takes time. It takes massive investment. Plus, you've got all these logistical hurdles. It's a whole thing. So even though demand for oil was sky high, supply couldn't magically keep up overnight.
And of course, we all saw the results of that at the gas pump.
Painful, wasn't it?
Tell me about it. But it's kind of wild when you think about it. Something that feels so local, like how much I'm paying to fill up my tank, is actually part of this much bigger global system.
It's a chain reaction. And that ripple effect, it's not just limited to gas or oil, it's everywhere. Think about something like, I don't know, computer chips. They're in practically everything these days.
Oh, right. Didn't we see massive supply chain issues with those during the pandemic?
Huge. Suddenly there's a shortage of new cars because they can't get the chips they need. Demand stays high, maybe even goes up, because people are hesitant to buy used cars at those inflated prices. It throws the whole system out of whack.
It's like this intricate dance, but someone tripped and took everyone down with them.
A very expensive dance at that. And that's why understanding these forces is so crucial. It's not just businesses trying to make a profit. It's also about policymakers trying to, not crash the entire economy.
Okay, yeah, that's a slightly higher stakes game than figuring out how much to charge for a cup of coffee.
For sure. And this is where it gets really complicated because imagine being that policymaker. Where do you even start? Do you try to control prices, influence supply, encourage demand? What's the play?
Sounds like a recipe for sleepless nights.
You got that right. It's like a giant game of economic Jenga. Every decision has consequences, some intended, some not, and you're never quite sure which move is going to topple the tower.
Yikes. I'm starting to feel a little overwhelmed here.
It's a lot, but it's fascinating stuff. And it makes you think about those larger trends we mentioned earlier, like the whole shift towards sustainable consumption. That has the potential to be a real game changer in how we think about supply and demand.
How so?
Well, as more people prioritize things like ethical sourcing, environmental impact, it could totally reshape what consumers are demanding, even if it means paying a premium.
You mean people might be willing to pay more for something because it's sustainable?
It's already happening. Think about the market for electric cars. They often come with a higher price tag,
Yeah.
but more and more people are deciding that's a trade-off they're willing to make.
Which, of course, then pushes car companies to offer more electric and hybrid options.
Exactly. And suddenly you have this really interesting feedback loop happening. But it's not just about individual products either. It's potentially about rethinking our entire economic system, moving away from that whole take-make-waste model and towards a more circular economy where resources are reused, waste is minimized.
Okay, but what happens when those resources become increasingly scarce? And I'm not just talking about stuff like oil or rare earth minerals. We've been focusing a lot on products, services, things you can buy and sell. But what about clean air, clean water, a healthy planet?
Great point. Those are essential too, and they're becoming increasingly scarce. And that's where things get really, really interesting.
Because suddenly we're not just talking about economic value, but
Yeah.
environmental and social value too.
Exactly. It's a whole new ballgame.
Wow. We started with gas prices, and now we're contemplating the fate of humanity. This is why I love a good deep dive. You never know where it's going to lead.
It's all connected.
And on that cliffhanger, we're going to take a quick break. But don't go anywhere, deep divers, because when we come back, we're stepping into the future of supply and demand. And we're back for the final act of our deep dive into the world of supply and demand.
The grand finale.
We've talked about those core economic principles, how they play out in the real world. But now it's time to get a little sci-fi up in here.
Oh, I like where this is going. Time to break out the crystal ball.
Exactly. What does the future hold for supply and demand? Any predictions? What kind of wild ride are we in for?
If I had a crystal ball that could predict the economic future accurately, well, let's just say I wouldn't be here. I'd be on a beach somewhere.
Fair enough. But we can still make some educated guesses, right? So what's going to shake things up?
Well, one of the biggest game changers on the horizon has got to be automation.
Ah, yes. The robots are coming. But how does that impact supply and demand exactly? Give it to me in plain English.
Okay, so picture this, factories of the future humming along with robots doing practically everything. We're talking 24/7 production, barely any human involvement.
Sounds efficient.
hyper efficient, which could mean lower costs, at least theoretically. Sounds pretty good for the average consumer, right?
Cheaper gadgets. Who doesn't love that? But I feel like there's a but coming.
There's always a but, isn't there?
Yeah.
Here's the thing. If automation leads to mass job displacement,
Oh, right. If people don't have
if
jobs.
they don't have income,
If they don't have income.
they can't buy all those products, even if they're super cheap.
Whoa. So we could end up with an oversupply of stuff and not enough people who can actually afford it.
It's a real possibility. And it highlights how interconnected everything is. Economics, social factors. You can't separate them. It's not enough to just chase efficiency. We also have to consider the impact on people's lives, their livelihoods.
It's like that saying, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. And we need to make sure everyone benefits from these technological advances, not just a select few.
Couldn't agree more. And that brings up another really interesting question. What happens when the things that become most valuable aren't things you can just buy and sell?
Okay, you're going to have to elaborate on that one because you've officially lost me.
We were talking earlier about clean air, water, a healthy planet.
Hmm.
What if those become the truly scarce resources, the things that people are willing to pay a premium for?
I mean, we're already seeing that a little bit, right? People paying more for organic food, for products with less packaging.
Exactly. And as those resources become even scarcer, it could fundamentally change how we think about value. It's not just about producing more stuff, it's about protecting what we have. It's about sustainability, about long-term thinking.
Wow. So we went from gas prices to, like, the fate of humanity in one episode. Not bad.
I told you this stuff was interesting.
That's what I love about a good deep dive. You really never know where it's going to lead.
It's all connected, though. And understanding those connections, those underlying forces, that's what allows us to make better choices. As individuals, as businesses, as a society.
So, deep divers, we hope you've learned something new today, maybe gained a fresh perspective. And hey, next time you're faced with a price hike or you're scrolling through those online shopping deals, take a minute to think about those invisible forces at play, supply and demand. Because this isn't just theoretical stuff we're talking about. It's shaping the world around us every single day. And on that note, we'll catch you on the next deep dive.